Good morning, folks. It's time for us to begin our class. We've been looking this last 3 months at the book of Esther and thinking about we're here for such a time as this. This morning, we want to look at Esther chapter 7 and 8 and see how far we can get along in that. In this section, Haman's plot to annihilate the Jews is revealed, and Mordecai is promoted to a position of power. Remind folks that we are using the Bible app, and if you need some help getting into that to get the questions and notes that are there, I'll be glad to help you with that. In Esther chapter 5, we looked a couple weeks ago, Esther comes before the king uninvited. He extends the golden scepter to her, accepts her into his presence, and she asks a simple request. She wants him and Haman, who's the number 2 guy in the Persian Empire, to come to her house for a banquet. Now, we, in our culture, don't understand that. In our culture, the husband and wife sleep at least in the same bed or bedroom, or maybe at least in the same house. We see each other a lot, but in their culture, they didn't. As my understanding is that the women's area was separate from the men's area, and the queen would be invited on occasions to come to the king's apartment for the night or for the day or for a visit. And there were, by some of these cultures and some of these areas, there were areas where the women could get upstairs and look through a screened window into the king's court and maybe not hear what was going on, but see what was going on. And so what's the right word here? They're seeing each other, being close to each other in proximity was not a normal occurrence. So when she comes and asks the king for him and for Haman only to come to this banquet, it kind of raises questions, at least on everybody's part. So Haman, we read, was very proud of having this invitation. He goes home and he recounts to his wife and to his friends all of his great assets. We listed those. He's got this 10 sons, he's got all this wealth, he's got all this stuff going in his favor, except for he hates Mordecai. And so they recommend that he make arrangements to kill Mordecai. They'd already got the decree written that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews could be annihilated, but that was going to be another several months, almost a year away. So that night, that afternoon, he plans for Mordecai's death. So he has his servants build a gallows. And we talked about what that actually is. We'll come back to that. In chapter 6, the king can't sleep. And I wonder if he can't sleep because he's concerned about Esther's petition, her coming to him, and him asking, what do you want? It's evidence there's something wrong with her, and he doesn't know what it is. But for whatever reason, he can't sleep. So he has his servants come in and read the King's Chronicles. We talked about how important that was to the empire and how common that was. And he finds out Mordecai had uncovered his plot several years ago. Nothing had been done to reward him. And so he makes his plans to reward Mordecai. Haman comes in, having built his gallows, and he's going to ask the king to allow him to execute Mordecai, and instead he winds up prescribing how to honor Mordecai, and then he has to do that. So he goes back home, and he recounts his problems to his family. Chapter 7, banquet number 2. While Haman is at home, washing his feet from having led the horse around all over town, resting his throat for having proclaimed this is what the king does, people that wants to honor, nursing his emotional wounds for having been so humiliated, but yet thinking, how am I going to kill Mordecai? The servants come and say, okay, you got to go to the banquet. So, chapter 7, the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day also, as they drank their wine at the banquet, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be done. Now that's a carbon copy of what he said at the first banquet. In essence, what do you want done? This was not a happy meal. I mean, you got the king who's sleepy, you've got the queen who's anxious, and you've got Haman who is, you figure where he is on the emotional chart. He's upset, he's disgruntled, he's tired, he's sick of the whole situation. He's got to show and make up this appearance of enjoying this meal, but in his heart, he's not. And so it's not a good deal for them. So the king asked Esther, Queen Esther, notice the use of the word queen here, what's your petition and what is your request? And then this exaggerated thing up to half of the kingdom. He wouldn't give her half the kingdom, but that's just kind of an exaggeration. Whatever you want, it shall be done. It doesn't matter how large or small, how grand or less grandeur the request is, I'll be glad to do it. Now watch Esther's reply. Then Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given as my petition and my people as my request. Esther, what is your petition? What is your request? My petition is for my life. My request is for my people. Ahasuerus does not know that Esther is a Jew. And I don't think Haman had any idea that she was a Jew. Or excuse me, or did the king? I mean, they didn't know. She had not revealed her national heritage. Haman knew that Mordecai was a Jew, and surely Ahasuerus knew that Mordecai was a Jew. But they never made any association between Mordecai and Esther because they had kept that a secret. All communications with Esther and Mordecai had been through the concubines and the servants, not them face-to-face personally. So they never dotted the I's and crossed the T's and pulled them together and saw they were kinfolk. And I'm not sure that Ahasuerus knew who the people were that Haman had the decree written to destroy. Because Haman comes and says, there's a people scattered throughout your empire. They don't have laws like we've got. We need to get rid of them. And the king says, okay, do it. You know, here's the ring. Do what you want to. I don't think he realized, I don't think Haman ever said, it's the Jews, by the way. And if he had, it wouldn't have mattered because he didn't realize what was going on. So they were kind of clueless in this. But Esther goes on. Verse 3 or 4. We have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Now look at that. We have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. It's not just they're going to destroy us. I mean, we're going to be wiped out, I and my people. Remember, Mordecai had sent the word to Esther. Do not think that you're going to escape when this day comes around, because all the Jews are going to be killed. And who knows but that you've come to the kingdom for just such a time as this. Now, she goes on to say, now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the queen. If we'd been sold as slaves, that'd be okay. But this concept, this statement she made is just full of underlying meaning. If we'd been sold as slaves, I would not have said a thing, because the trouble would not be commensurate with the king. If we are annihilated, what is that going to do to the king and the kingdom? Well, let's switch over to what Tim's going to talk about in his sermon today about the Israelites leaving Egypt. One of the motivations that Pharaoh would have had to prevent Israel from leaving was the massive workforce. 2.5 million people are going to leave Egypt. Not just workforce, you've got taxpayers, you've got economy, you've got buying and selling of goods. I mean, if we just take the whole city of Montgomery, the whole of Montgomery County, and empty it, all the people leave. What's that going to do to this area? Now, there might be a lot of rejoicing. I don't know. There might be a lot of sorrow. I don't know. Depends on how you look at it, what side of the political realm you're on or whatever. But if we did just evacuate an area, what would that do? And if we take off a whole portion of a population, how is that going to affect the kingdom? And if we kill all the Jews throughout an empire that reaches from Ethiopia to India to Macedonia, that is a large number of people. And it's going to affect the empire in a very commensurate or uncommensurate way, if that's a proper word. But if we'd been sold as slaves, remember the price that Haman gave, we added up to be $270,960,000 worth of gold. That's how much Haman said, I will give to the king's treasury to pay for this. Now, Ahasuerus saw this as a pretty nice piece of change. I don't know if he figured out how much it was going to actually cost, but okay, I'll take that. But watch what happens next. Verse 5. King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? And who would presume to do this? Now, the king is in charge of a massive empire. He has 7 men that are his close counselors. Go back to chapter 1 when Vashti is deposed. That's who he calls upon for advice. And I think it's Memucan who offers the suggestion that we make this, and thus Esther is selected. The men change out over time. Haman is promoted to be one of those guys. And he is the number 2 guy in the empire. And so when Ahasuerus asked this question, he's not just talking to Esther. He's looking at Haman too. Who would have done this? Where is the guy? I want to see him, not knowing that Haman was the guy. And who would presume to do such a thing against my queen? Again, I don't think Haman had a clue that Esther was Jewish. And Esther says, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. He is my foe, he is my enemy, and he is wicked. Because all of this has been done underhandedly against me and my people. And Haman became terrified. Imagine that. So, the king, in anger, rose and went for a walk. Now, I don't think that Ahasuerus, laying there on his couch, sat up, took his wine glass, set it down, said, I'm going to walk around the garden and think about this a minute. And walked out and said, I think I saw a mockingbird out there. I'm going to check him out. I don't think that's what he did. I think he threw that glass across the room, stormed out of the house, and if I was the guy at the door, I couldn't get that door open fast enough to let him through. And I'm going to hide behind it because I don't want him hitting me as he goes by. He is exceedingly mad because this whole thing is against his whole constitution, his whole way of looking at things, his whole idea of how this ought to be done. He's mad. He's mad because Esther's involved. He's mad because Haman is the one doing this. So he's got some serious anger issues. Meanwhile, Haman, in terror, stays behind to beg. He already realizes that he's lost all favor with the king. But can I get Esther to plead my case and allow me to live? So he stays back to beg. By the way, harem protocol requires that no one is to be allowed in the queen's presence without the king being there. When the king storms out, Haman should have gone out too. Now, if he had gone with the king, it wouldn't have been good. If he'd run the other way, which would have been the smart thing to do, that wouldn't have been good either, because that would have demonstrated even further his guilt. But the protocol of the harem requires that even if the king is there and the queen is there, no man can get within 7 steps of the queen. Today we call that social distancing. But that was the rule. He could not get that close. Now, again, we've got servants all over the place. You've got a banquet in the afternoon. They're drinking wine, eating desserts. We'd think of, turkey and dressing, all that kind of stuff. It probably wasn't all that much. But it was a nice formal affair for them. And you've got maidservants attending to Esther. You've got eunuchs all over the place. They're like wallpaper. They're everywhere. They're quiet. They're positioned. They're stationed. They're guarding. But no one seems to have stepped in between Haman and Esther. That's not their position until they're called upon. Unless Haman makes some kind of aggressive move toward her. So they're there. Haman should have left, but he didn't. So verse 7. The king arose in his anger, drinking wine, and went to the palace garden. Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Now when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Now, here's the scene. The king walks back in. He's still mad. Maybe he's cooled off from 1,050 degrees to 1,049 and 9/10. But he's still hot. As he walks in, he sees Haman falling on the couch of Esther. Now, don't think your living room sofa, divan, as my grandmother used to call it. I don't know why. But don't think of that in your mind. Think of a lounge chair, a chaise lounge, where you would actually lay on your side, propped up on an elbow, and be eating and drinking. Some try to say that what Haman did was he stumbled, probably on a Persian rug, since they were in Persia, and fell at her feet. What he was really doing, and this is the same word that's used a lot of other places for, with Cain in Genesis 4, God says, "Why has your countenance fallen?" This word is used a lot of ways in that falling motion. He was actually getting on his knees at the foot of her couch to beg for mercy. Ahasuerus walks in and sees the action and assumes the worst. This guy, this foe, this enemy, this wicked man has plotted the death of my queen and her people. And now, seeing this physical action, what's he to assume? The king says, verse 8, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So you've got the eunuchs there. Haman gets too close. They're already in motion. And the king says this, "Is he going to assault the queen and me in the house?" So they covered his face. The eunuchs basically arrest him. And whether they put a handkerchief, a pillowcase over his head or something, they cover him. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means, one, Haman can't see. He's being led away. He is under arrest. Also means he is never to be allowed to see the king or queen again. They've covered his face. He will never see the king again. Now, I think in all of this, there is some of the discussion that's not recorded. Verse 9, Harbonah, who we meet in chapter 1, one of the king's eunuchs who were before the king, "Behold, indeed," he says, "the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. Now, Harbonah says, hey, by the way, there's a set of gallows. I'm thinking somewhere in this discussion, somewhere in these actions, Ahasuerus says, what am I going to do? Harbonah suggests, you know what? Haman had built a gallows for the express purpose of killing Mordecai. It's in his house. Now, not in the living room, okay? In the courtyard, in the garden, in a place conspicuous, not just for Haman to see and to gloat over, but for all the people in the area to see. Most of us can look across our privacy fences and see the tall trees of neighbors 3, 4, 5, 6 houses down on the other side of the block. And so we can see a bird nest up in the top of one of these trees, or we can see a hawk sitting a block away in the top of a tree. So we could see Mordecai impaled on a 75-foot pole from many parts of the city around Haman's household. So don't think of our 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a carport, and the yard we got to mow twice a week. Think the whole block where you live is his house and hold and estate. And probably lands and farms and flocks and herds beyond that. So he not only had a nice giant area in town, he had property outside the city limits and perhaps throughout the empire. So Harbonah says, you know, that gallows is not being used. So the king says, hang him. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger was subsided. We're going to look at this again later. But Haman and Mordecai swapped places. I'll let you ponder that one a while. Mordecai was supposed to be in that gallows. Guess who was? It was Haman. Haman had prepared it for Mordecai, but the king used it for Haman. But this swapping goes on. It doesn't stop with just that. There's a lot to be involved later on. So they do swap places. Chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had disclosed what he was to her. When a political adversary like Haman is executed, his property is immediately confiscated by the king. It's at his disposal. So the king gives all that Haman had to Esther. Some say, well, that's a compensation for the trauma she had been through. It was a gift, however you want to call it. Not real sure why, but that's what he did. His house, his furniture, his goods, his lands, his riches, his bank account, his servants, everything, his flocks and herds, property, whatever he had was given to Esther. And I wonder, what about his wife and sons? Would she have taken them as servants? Or did she take them as servants? Or were they sent packing somewhere? She had to go home to her parents or sisters or cousins or whatever, brothers. What happened to Zeresh, we do not know. Now, we do know what happened to the boys. That'll come up a little bit later on. But everything that Haman owned, flocks, herds, horses, animals, dogs, cats, canaries in cages, everything automatically was deeded over to Esther. And in this process, and I think this is part of the discussion, the conversation that's left out of the record here. Somewhere in this process, Esther says, by the way, King, Mordecai is my cousin. He is a Jew. He's the one that Haman got all this going against, not knowing I was involved. Nothing is said, by the way, about Ahasuerus' role in that decree. Haman comes to the king and said, there's a people that we need to annihilate. And the king says, okay, here's my signet ring. You take care of it. Esther doesn't say, by the way, you authorized this when you gave this ring to Haman. She doesn't put any blame on him. So I'm thinking the whole time he's clueless. And I'm sure he was mad because of how he got tricked into that. So Esther gives everything to Mordecai to oversee. She cannot give it to him because you cannot re-gift a gift from the king. So the king takes everything that Haman owned and gives it to Esther, and Esther puts Mordecai in charge of it. They swap places. So whatever Haman was ruling over, house and lands, Mordecai is now overseeing. He doesn't own it. It's not given to him. He's its manager for Esther. So whatever she would have received as being queen is amplified by that possession of that property. So whatever income that property would have generated, Esther would have obtained a share in it. At least that's how we might look at it. So, but verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 1, 2 rather. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept and implored him to avert the evil scheme of Haman, the Agagite, and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. And the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, so Esther arose and stood before the king. Then she said, okay, she goes before the king again. She falls at his feet. Some say she bowed down to kiss his feet. Now, we're not sure if at this point the king is back on his throne and she comes back into that courtroom. That scene is not depicted here. But wherever they are, she comes in before him. I got another quick request. She falls at his feet. He extends the scepter, not necessarily to prevent her execution, but to demonstrate he accepts her graciousness in his presence. And with much nicety, if, verse 5, I have found favor before the king, if it pleases the king, if it seems proper to the king, if I am pleasing in the king's sight. Okay. Enough of the nice stuff. What do you want? Let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the calamity which will befall my people? How can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Haman wrote a decree. It came out on the 13th of Nisan, the day before the Jews would celebrate the Passover. That on the 13th day of the 12th month, Adar, 12 months away, all the Jews were to be annihilated. So king, let another letter be written to revoke that letter. In other words, issue a recall. But the king says, verse 7, to Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, I have given the house of Haman to Esther. They've hanged him on the gallows because he stretched out his hand against the Jews. But if you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring, for a decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked. It's recorded in Scripture, but not anywhere else, which is kind of odd, that the Persians had a rule. If the king issues a decree, it cannot be repealed. Now, in our government, what little I remember when I failed government in, 11th grade, 12th grade, I've forgotten that too. Like a fellow said, there's 3 things I can't remember. 4 things I can't remember. I can't remember all that. But if I remember right, which I might, I stand to be corrected, that in our government system, if a law has been passed, it can be repealed. I think they did that with the alcohol at one time. They prohibited sales of alcohol, then they repealed that law. They didn't take it off the books. They just wrote another one to contradict it. And I understand in the course of history there have been a lot of contradictory laws that have been written. The one that I remember, somebody said that, I think it was in Kentucky, when they came out with the automobile, you could not back your car out of your driveway into the street. Then he wrote another one, said you can't have a circle driveway in your front yard. And another one, you can't turn your car around in the yard. So how do you get the car out of the driveway? If you can't back it out, you can't turn it around, you can't pull it. So they realized that this was a controversial. This is a problem here. We cannot just say, okay, tear that one up and forget it. Because once the king's signet ring, whether he put it on there himself or not, it cannot be revoked. So, what do we do? Mordecai has the ring. Y'all handle it. That's kind of what the king says. He gave the signet ring. He took it back from Haman when they arrested him. He gives it to Mordecai, thus promoting Mordecai from whatever position he had at the king's gate to the number 2 position in the empire. Mordecai has the signet ring. Y'all handle it. We cannot revoke the law. So you do something, take care of it. I'm out of it. Someone said he don't like take care of the business aspect. So, verse 9. The king's scribes were called at that time, the 3rd month, which is the month Sivan, the 23rd day. That's going to answer to our May, June. Okay? It was written according to all that Mordecai commanded the Jews, the satraps, the governors, the princes, the provinces, which extend from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to his script, to every people according to their language, as well as to the Jews according to their script and their language. Now, Haman's decree was not written for the Jews to read. Everybody else could get the message, and it was addressed to the satraps and the governors, to all the leading men. So Haman's decree was sent out just to the political leaders, military leaders, not to the common people and not to the Jews. They heard about it when they read the posters on the columns of the capital city, when it was posted around the bulletin boards, published in the newspapers in the local area. They heard about it secondhand. But Mordecai's decree is addressed to the Jews and to everybody else. So verse 10, he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horses, riding on steeds, sired by the royal stud. Does anybody in here have the King James Version open? We all got away from that, huh? That's okay. Because the King James Version says they sent them out on mules, camels, and dromedaries, and horses. There is no record of the Persians using mules and camels and dromedaries for this purpose. They always used horses. Now, I learned when we were in Israel that the animal that has 2 humps is the camel. The one that has 1 hump is the dromedary. And if he has no hump, he's hump-free. It took me a while to think about it, to remember what he's saying on that one. Someone said, no, it's a horse. So on the third month, that's the month Sivan, the 23rd day, 2 plus or minus months, about 2 months from the first decree. The one that Haman wrote came out of the 13th day of Nisan, the first month of the year. This comes out about a little over 2 months later. And here's the decree, verse 11. By the way, these messages were sent by the fastest horses the king had. Remember, we talked about them having a Pony Express set up where the horse could go so far, and when he began to fade, there was a booth and another horse waiting, and off they went. And so it's kind of the ancestor of what we think of as the Pony Express. In them, verse 11, the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble, to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month of the month Adar. A copy of this edict is to be issued as law in each and every province, published to all the people, so the Jews would be ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. In the last 2 months, people were plotting. They were thinking, okay, I know this Jew, I have never liked him. So when this day comes around, I am personally going to kill him. And whatever he's got, I'm going to take as mine. Meanwhile, the Jews are in fear. What are we going to do? We're going to be led like lambs to the slaughter. We can't do a thing about it until this decree comes out from Mordecai. And it basically says the Jews can fight back in defense, kill all, and take their plunder. And immediately we say, wait a minute. Why kill the children and the women? Are they part of the battle? Are they part of the enemy? Is this just a common phrase to mean everybody? I think that's more the idea. Not that they mercilessly killed women and children. But this statement is just an exaggeration to say any enemy of the Jews is to be killed, annihilated, and the Jews take their plunder. Just like Esther was given Haman's plunder, they could take any plunder of anyone that they killed. Now we're going to see how that unfolds later. So verse 14, the couriers hastened, impelled by the king's command, went out riding the royal steeds, and the decree was given out at the citadel in Susa. So immediately, and I can just see this taking place. You've got all these scribes from different nationalities, linguists of varying degrees, writing these decrees and thinking, okay, when this gets to Ethiopia, it's got to be in this text, in this style, in these phrases, in these words. Hebrew is written backwards to English. And the verb comes before the noun. Wait. In English, we're supposed to have learned you've got the subject of the sentence and then the verb. Now, in Hebrew, you got the verb first and then the subject. So literally, Genesis 1 says, in beginning created, that is God, the heavens and the earth. Now, that's a literal translation of Genesis 1:1. And to us, that doesn't read right. Okay, so they had to write it that way for the Jews. They had to write it this way for the Ethiopians, this way for the Egyptians, this way for the Macedonians, this way for the people in India. Through every province, every dialect, no one was allowed to misunderstand this decree. I find that interesting. The Jews can fight back. Everybody needs to be ready. Verse 15, Mordecai goes out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a large crown of gold, a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. Mordecai, watch how he changes clothes. He's at the king's gate. Not exactly positive what his job there was. But while there, he did uncover the assassinated plot against Xerxes, Ahasuerus. While there, he reads this decree from Haman, and he puts on sackcloth so he cannot be at the king's gate. Esther offers him clothes to change into, so he can come there. He rejects them. And now he comes out dressed in these fine royal robes. These are not the clothes that he wore that morning. This is all in one day, folks. These are not the clothes he wore that morning when Haman had to lead him around in procession around town. He had to put the king's clothes on, then change back into his clothes, and then he's brought in before the king, as Esther says, this Mordecai that revealed the plot against you is my cousin. He's the one who raised me, that encouraged me to come to this position and to enroll myself in the lottery to be the next queen. He's been my advisor. He's been my mother and my father. And to that, Mordecai is elevated to Haman's place. And he walks out of the king's court in the fancy duds. Not the king's crown, but a crown demonstrating his position from, if we can use this term, from gatekeeper to the grand vizier, the number 2 guy in the empire, with the king's signet ring on his hand, having the authority from the king to decree what he wishes, and what he stamps with that ring becomes law. And everybody is happy. I wonder, with that statement being made like that, how many people were not happy with Haman? How many people recognized, realized, visualized this hatred that Haman had toward Mordecai that doesn't seem to be reciprocated? How many people encouraged Mordecai to bow? How many people told Haman, he ain't worth it. Don't let that bother you. But regardless, many people were happy because of Mordecai's elevation. All right, verse 16. For the Jews, there was light, gladness, joy, and honor. This second decree brings about a feast and holiday. Verse 17. Each and every province and each and every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. Man, they were having a party. So as this news spread across the empire, as we said before, in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, everybody in the empire had heard about this. So if this decree went out on our calendar the 1st of June, by Father's Day, everybody in the empire had read the decree. And as the news spread across the empire, if you just take, that Bounty paper towel and lay it on the counter and pour a little water on it and watch it spread from the corner all the way through the paper towel, as that news spread like that water through the towel across the empire, they were feasting, they were holidaying, they were having a grand old time, because now there was, as we could say, a light at the end of the tunnel. How had that first decree affected those who were not Jews? Think about that. City of Susa was in confusion, we're told. What about the rest of the empire? And now this second one comes about. How does it affect them? The last phrase of chapter 8. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. So, on the 13th day of Nisan, the day before the Passover, as this decree comes out, as it filters across the empire, people are thinking, we're going to kill those Jews. And all of a sudden, you know what? I don't think those Jews are that bad folks. Surely they did not realize all the intrigue that had gone on in the capital. Maybe the people in Susa did, but the people outside did not. But a lot of people began to fear the Jews. And the old saying, you can't lick them, join them. So and this statement is, what's the right word here? It's confusing. Did they proselyte and become Jews? Did they leave their paganism and go to the monotheism of the Jews? Did they change their attitude toward the Jews and accepted them as fellow citizens? And accepted them in that way, became one of their, I'm not sure the right word here, company, fellows, accepted them into their society. Instead of building a walls that kept them apart, knocked the walls down, accepted them into their culture, swapped culture with them. Regardless of how you understand that, the attitude of the nations toward the Jews was changed. How do our actions or our reactions affect those around us? Go back through and meditate on how this affected the Jews and how it affected the people around them. And look at it from our perspective. Our actions, our reactions affect other people. They see it. I was down in kind of a hole in front of a house one time cutting a board. I had to cut a notch in a board. And I had my handsaw, and I'm sawing away like you're supposed to with a handsaw. And it did what handsaws normally do. It jumped the track. And it went to the bone right here. I mean, before I could stop it, I got mad at the saw, and I shouldn't have, because it don't know the difference between wood and meat. I knew that. I set the saw down, climbed out, went to the truck, wrapped it up, tightened it up, tried to catch the blood, went back, got down the hole, and finished cutting the notch. Somebody came around working with us and said, "What'd you do?" The guy watching me said he cut his finger. Bad. I said, "You know what? He didn't even cuss." I thought about it. It hurt too bad. But you think about that, the way I dealt with that affected him. And the way we deal with things in our lives affects others. I heard about one fellow who was going to have open heart surgery. And the doctor came in and before they put him into this knocked him out thing, talked about what they're going to do, and he said, "You seem to be awfully calm." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Somebody bigger than both of us is in charge." My faith is in God, and how I approach this and how you approach this, whether you're successful or not, doesn't matter. God's in charge. I'm in His hands. I'm at peace with that. And that affected the doctor. So how we act and react affects those around us. And let's work to be sure that we affect them in the right way. Living for Him, speaking about Him, and serving in His name. Thank you. God bless you. Oh, wait. I just saw my note. Judy reminded me. This is the first Sunday of the month, the day we take up our collection for Mia and Angel at the City of Children. And so if you can add that to your contribution or put it separately, I've got an envelope. If you want to give it to me, I'll put it in the box for you. However you want to do that, that's fine.